Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the Acropolis, the shining jewel of Athens. The Acropolis of Athens is a bastion of art and culture worthy of the gods themselves. Within this citadel, you will find many important sacred buildings, as well as some of the most magnificent art in all of Greece. You are in for a very enlightening visit. When you're done, come find me, and we can discuss the things you have seen. Farewell for now.
The Acropolis has gone through many changes in its long history. It began as a simple rock, was settled as early as the Neolithic period, and then became a fortress in the Mycenaean period. Stone buildings started appearing in the 7th century BCE. But the famous structures whose ruins remain visible today date mainly from a period of construction in the 5th century BCE. The location of the Acropolis is closely tied with Athens' foundation myth. Supposedly, it was the site where Athena and Poseidon competed for the city's patronage. This connection gave the Acropolis a sacred aura, and it was considered the religious heart of the city. The Temple of Athena Nike was built on the remains of old fortifications from the Mycenaean era. Worship at the temple can be traced back to the 6th century BCE, but the building itself was destroyed during the Greco-Persian Wars a century later. It was rebuilt during the Peloponnesian War. Given that the name Athena Nike roughly means Athena of victory, it was likely constructed in the hopes that Athens would win the war. Unusually, the temple depicts historical scenes of battles against the Persians instead of the more mythologically inclined art of other Greek buildings. The temple's priestess was chosen randomly among the Athenians and received a salary of 50 drachmae annually, along with skins and trophies from sacrificed animals. The Acropolis was built up over a long period, due in no small part to its partial destruction during the Greco-Persian Wars. It was in the 5th century BCE, though, that the Acropolis received its most significant improvements. This period was an extremely prosperous time for Athens, both financially and culturally. With a booming economy bolstered by trade and the Lavrion silver mines, Pericles, the leader of Athens, financed a huge project to rebuild the citadel. He enlisted the help of renowned artists, like the sculptor Phidias, as well as the architects Iktinos and Callicrates. Together, they erected buildings like the Parthenon and the Propylaea Gateway. Pericles' goal was to make the Acropolis into a glorious monument to the gods and to mortal Athenians.
Ο νους εστί όσπερ κύπελλον που εξύπλησε.
Ναι, άλλη Αθήνη στις ιστορίες. Λέξος η
μία και ως αύριο εγγύησε ότι η ζωή στα σχήρας μου. Ως κατά.
Έχουμε μάρμαρο πολύ.
Behind the Propylaea was the giant bronze statue of Athena Promachos, or Athena who fights on the front lines. That name was reflected in the spear and shield the statue held in its hands. It was erected in the mid-5th century BCE by the artist Phidias. According to an inscription, it took 9 years to make and cost almost 500,000 drachmae. At approximately 10 meters tall, the statue was apparently so large that Pausanias claimed its helmet and spear tip could be seen from the sea near Cape Sunion, 60 kilometers away. The ornamentation on the statue's shield was engraved by the metalsmith Mies.
Τραγωδία διαφθείρει τους νέους και ούτε κατά
Επικαλούμε σε μάκαρη, πολυόνιμε.
Αου!
The Araphoroi were young girls between the ages of 7 and 11 who were in charge of special rites. A list of 4 girls was drafted by the Assembly of Citizens, from which the High Magistrate, the Archon Basileus, chose 2 to serve as Araphoroi for the year. The girls lived in a house on the Acropolis. They were in charge of carrying sacred objects and weaving the peplos of Athena. The peplos was a sacred robe offered to Athena during Panathenaea, a festival held in her honor. The Araphoroi.
Όταν ηλικιωθώ, πειρατής έσωμαι και ανά τη γέα μου περιπλανηθώ. Όταν ηλικιωθώ, τραπεζίτης έσωμαι, της εταίρης πλούτο μου δύσω. Όταν ηλικιωθώ, συμμορήτης έσωμαι και φόβον παρέξομαι της χωρικής. Όταν ηλικιωθώ, έμπορος έσωμαι και άπατα τα της πόρτας
και το επίσταστε. Σύμφημιση. Αλίστας τραγωδίας, Σοφοκλής δείκνηση ημιτήρη τρόπο επιτυχάνεται.
The Erechtheion was an atypical temple. It was dedicated not only to Athena Polias, but also to Cecrops, the mythical founder of Athens, his son Erechtheos, and even Poseidon, the sea god who challenged Athena for possession of the city. The temple was divided into sections. The eastern part housed a statue dedicated to Athena, while the western section jointly belonged to Poseidon and Erechtheos. Meanwhile, King Cecrops' grave was believed to be under the caryatid porch. Under the temple was a crypt that was said to contain the sacred snakes of Athena. The snakes may have had a sweet tooth because the priestesses of Athena allegedly fed them honey cakes.
Non μήτε πολύολβε, πολυλίστη νυχήρα κακών, εις τρούσα βρωτών ψυχάς.
Ο πατήρ μου λέγει ότι τη νύχταν ένιοι αστέρες ανατέλουση και θείουση εντός του μεγάλου ρεύματος.
Τι άραγε εννοείς? Υπάρχει συστάσεις
Αερώνυμε και πολιώνυμε,
Ακριβώς.
χθονία
Ήταν
και
τεκρεμάμενοι
χειροκτώνε,
όσοι μάτια στα
φυλαγρώτη
παραπονούντα.
και λυτηρία, δρυμονίτης και βρωτών ελπίς, ελθέ, η κατέκει.
Επικαλούμε σε μάκαρ πολυόνιμε, πυρήπολε και τελετάρχα, Θεόν πάτερ ή δε... ότι έδι πάβει να
Καλούμε σε Μάκαρ.
Μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει με
πόλη και τελετά.
φωνία και θυροκοπώνε φιλαθρότη και...
τούτο ούποτε συμβήσετε. Ως μερός ουκ εργάζεστε εδώ.
Μη τόσο ικανός, όσο υπερκαλών.
Ή εσύ, ως περεπλευρέ του κυπέλου έτοιμη εκδόση, ότι έδι πάβει να προσφύλλα ώρα δυσαρμονία μόνο.
Ναι, άλλη αφήγηση της ιστορίας. Μην μιμήκεις τα γέννη.
Μεγαλώνει με και πολιώνει με φωνία και θυροκοπώνε φιλαθρότη και λυτηρία. Δρυμονή της και βρωτών ελπίς. Ελθέ, η κατέχεις ωραίων δρυμούς.
Όταν η μητήρ ή κλινήρης.
The Parthenon is one of the most well-known buildings in the world and an enduring symbol of ancient Greek civilization. While it is located on the Acropolis, the building is not a traditional temple. It was built by the sculptor Phidias and the architects Callicrates and Ictinus as a great monument to the glory of the city of Athens. That glory is evident in its many carvings. One of the most carved monuments in Greek architecture, the Parthenon's decorations depict several mythological scenes. These include the birth of Athena, her fight against Poseidon for the patronage of Athens, the gods' battle with the giants, and the procession of the great Panathenaea.
Τι έστειν η πίστη, ημεν το σου το προσδες...
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσει με ίδιο.
The Parthenon's inner chamber, or cella, contained a massive statue of Athena that was considered to be one of the sculptor Phidias's greatest masterpieces. The statue was chryselephantine, a combination of gold and ivory. To justify the steep cost of its construction, Pericles told Athenians that the statue was a gold reserve, which could be disassembled in times of economic distress. The cella also allegedly contained a pool, whose main purpose was to control the room's humidity, which helped preserve the statue's ivory. Athens' treasury was located in the Parthenon, where it was believed to be protected by Athena herself. The treasury contained objects of great value, acquired from different conquests, as well as a mass of minted silver coins and various offerings to Athena. Pericles also decided to move the entirety of the Delian League's treasure to the Parthenon in 454 BCE. This was a great testament to Athens' power over the rest of Greece. The riches were divided into two parts: the Demosia, which belonged to the city, and the Hiera Cremata, which was dedicated to the goddess and only used for religious purposes.
Επικαλούμε σε, Μάκαρη.
And what did you think of the Acropolis? It truly is quite something, isn't it? A sacred sanctuary and an architectural marvel, all in one. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Very well. On to the next tour.
Welcome, traveler, to the ruins of Mykene. These are the ruins of Mykene, center of the old Mykenean civilization. It was home to great warriors and heroes. In many ways, places like Athens and Sparta stand on the shoulders of its accomplishments. This tour will take you through its ruins and introduce you to its most important monuments, revealing its history in the process. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The Mycenaean civilization flourished in the Late Bronze Age between 1600 and 1200 BCE. During this period, it was mainly located in the Peloponnese and central Greece. Mycenaeans were known for exploring distant lands. Notably, they battled the Hittite-allied city of Walusa in a conflict that was believed to be the inspiration for Homer's Trojan War. But the Mycenaean people didn't only travel to fight. They learned much from their neighbors, the Minoans of Crete, such as how to write syllabic script on clay tablets. Such tablets provide evidence that Mycenaeans spoke an early form of Greek. They also tell of how great Mycenaean kings ruled over their warriors from opulent palaces in places like Mycenae, Thebes, and Knossos. The entrance to Agamemnon's Citadel, or the Lion Gate, is one of the most iconic monuments in Mycenae. It is impressive for both its height and for the intimidating rendering on its relief, which depicts two lions standing on either side of a column. Unfortunately, the lions' heads, which were presumably made of a precious metal or higher quality stone, have been lost to time. The gate was most likely meant to greet a triumphant king returning home from successful military campaigns and to awe foreign visitors. The entrance to When these shafts were discovered by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in 1876, he believed the 6 gold-filled graves to be connected with the family of the great king Agamemnon, even going so far as to proclaim a gold mask he found within to be the death mask of Agamemnon. However, this was refuted by later excavations, which showed that the 19 bodies buried in the shafts dated back to a few hundred years before Agamemnon was even born. In fact, at the time of the body's burial, the Lion Gate and the citadel walls had not even been built yet. It's estimated that the people in the graves were members of the first Mycenaean dynasty. The graves later became a place of worship for Mycenaean kings, who raised walls to protect them. These walls helped preserve several incredible artifacts, including women's jewelry, death masks, and masterfully crafted weapons. By 1250 BCE, Mycenae was at the height of its power, and its living quarters and workshops were numerous. Houses were built everywhere, from the top of the palace's hill near the king's residence, to the slopes and terraces within the walls, to the nearby hills outside the citadel. At one point, the citadel's walls even had to be enlarged to make room for more quarters. The people who lived inside the citadel were those with high status in either the military, religious, or administrative sectors of the kingdom. This is reflected by the ceramic and metal vessels inside the houses, as well as their painted plastered walls. A traveler seeking an audience with the king would have first ascended a steep ramp from the Lion Gate to the citadel's summit. Here, they would have walked into the palatial complex through a grand entrance called the Propylon. Once inside, their gaze would immediately be drawn to the palace's main hall, a monumental area known as the Megaron. The vividly decorated Megaron, which glittered with precious objects and colorful frescoes in its heyday, was where the king would have received the traveler. If the king was feeling generous, he would have shared with the visitor the palace's most marvelous feature, its commanding and majestic view, which stretched from the plain of Argolis to the gleaming Aegean Sea. was in this palace where a legendary Mycenaean king like Agamemnon would have held court. According to Homer and other poets, Agamemnon led the Greeks in the sack of Troy. Stories say that he was a fearsome warrior on par with Achilles, but also an overly ambitious and arrogant ruler. He sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to convince Artemis to grant his ship's passage to Troy. After conquering the city, he returned to Mycenae with mounds of riches, and a Trojan named Cassandra as his concubine. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, was not pleased with her husband's sacrifice of their daughter. She plotted to murder her husband out of anger. The plot was successful, and, depending on the version of the story, Agamemnon was either murdered in his bath by Clytemnestra or killed by his cousin Aegisthus during a banquet.
You've completed the tour. I trust it was an eye-opening experience. Though it did not last, Mykene was a sort of precursor to what would eventually become the Greek civilization we know today. It's important we remember them, if only to avoid repeating their mistakes. Now, what else would you like to do? I appreciate your desire for more knowledge. Let us continue.
Welcome, friend, to this especially sacred part of the Olympian Sanctuary. The Sanctuary of Olympia was dedicated to Zeus, king of the gods. It had close connections to the divine, as you will see very soon. I'll come find you when you're done, and we can talk about what you've learned.
This workshop was built for the renowned sculptor Phidias after his work on the Acropolis of Athens. In 435 BCE, Phidias came to Olympia to begin working on the great chryselephantine statue of Zeus. He died 5 years later. shortly after completing his masterpiece. This grand statue would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Phidias's workshop was located right next to the Temple of Zeus. Its structure has been well preserved, mostly owing to its conversion to a church in the 5th century CE. Archaeologists have also discovered lots of ancient materials in the surrounding area, such as casting molds and sculpting tools. The most famous artifact, however, is a cup bearing an inscription that aggressively states, "I belong to Phidias." On the 5th and final day of the Olympic Games, victors attended a ceremony where they were crowned with olive wreaths and showered in flowers. The crowns came from the sacred olive tree of Zeus, which was planted near the god's temple. A young boy trimmed the branches with a golden sickle before giving them to the Hellanodikai to turn into wreaths. After the crowning ceremony, it was time for great feasting and celebration.
Σπανιωτά την τιάφτη η νίκη του Ανδρία.
Pelops was both a legendary Greek hero and the mythical founder of the Olympic Games. According to legend, Pelops fell in love with the beautiful Hippodamia. Her father, Oenomaus, the king of Pisa, disapproved of their union. Having once heard a prophecy that he would be killed by his son-in-law, Oenomaus was known to challenge his daughter's suitors to chariot races, killing them when he won. Still, Pelops was determined to win Hippodamia's heart. Before the race, he enlisted the help of Poseidon, who gave him a golden chariot with 4 winged horses. Pelops was able to win both the race and the hand of his beloved, while Oenomaus was dragged to death by his horses. The start of this famous race was depicted on the eastern pediment of the Temple of Zeus.
Επικαλούμε σε, Πάτερ, πολυόνιμε, πυρήμολε και τελεχάτα, Θεόν Πάτερ εις
The Heraion was a temple dedicated to Hera. It is one of the oldest temples in the sanctuary, dating back to approximately 590 BCE. The structure included columns painted with images of women who won the Heraia, an athletic competition made up of running events. Every 4 years, 16 women were chosen to make a veil dedicated to Hera. These women also organized the competition, though they did not compete in it. The Heraia was unique for its focus on female athletes, in contrast to the male-exclusive Olympic Games. Hera was the goddess of women, marriage, family, and childbirth. She ruled Mount Olympus as Queen of the Gods, along with her husband and brother Zeus. Many mythological stories paint her as being annoyed at Zeus's many lovers and illegitimate offspring. In Greek art, Hera is usually depicted as matronly and regal, often wearing a crown or sitting on a throne. She is also sometimes seen holding a pomegranate, a symbol of both fertility and death. Hera's cult was very popular across Greece, and Olympia even minted her image on its coinage.
Μία πύπνουσα αναμένουσα τον Έκιν.
Ημί ο πρεσβύτερος πέφυγε άπατα.
Μεγαλώνουμε και πολιώνουμε, φωνία και θηροκτώνε, φυλαγρώτη και λυτηρία, θρημονίτης και πρωτών ελπίς, ελθέ, κατέχεις ωραίους λόγους με οδηγές των κομμών.
One of the highlights of the Olympic Games was a ceremony that took place on the third day of the festival. It began with a procession of athletes, ambassadors, Hellenodikai, and animals. The group made their way around the Altis until they arrived at the Temple of Zeus. Then the animals were brought in front of the altar of Zeus and offered as a sacrifice. This sacrifice was known as a hecatomb, a word that originally described the sacrifice of 100 oxen. During the hecatomb, the bones and legs of the animals were burned and carried to the top of a mound of ashes from previous sacrifices. Meanwhile, the meat of the animals was saved for a large banquet held later in the evening.
Μυθεύματα. Τούτο ούποτε συμβήσε. Ως περός, ούκοι εργάζεστε. Ουδής...
Αφρονή. Ο εμός πατή.
Τι γίνεται.
Τα ημάτια διερριγμένα, το σώμα με λέγει.
Η αγορά πληθύσα. Κακίνος ο παιδικός. Έπαιζε...
Ναι, ασχολία την άδελε.
Έναν εξάδελφο και πώς της
Η
χωρίς.
γυναίκας διαπέχεστε πόρο ταύτης το αυτό και τους δούλοι. Η τραγωδία διαφθείρει... Οι χαρακτήρες...
Τι νοσησί η ήθλιε, ουκούν συμμορείτε.
Τραγωδοποιός έστι κλέφτης.
Να,
Ήθης συνεπιφέρει πράξεις και παρεπόμενα. Τραγωδία ανέρεσης εστί, εστιμιασμός, μυτιόμενος είναι να κλονίσει την ισορροπία.
The Olympic Games were dedicated to Zeus, and all the ceremonies and events were hosted in his honor. It is no surprise that the largest temple in the sanctuary was the Temple of Zeus. While most temples were restricted to priests, the Temple of Zeus welcomed all who visited Olympia. This openness was most likely meant to show off the gold and ivory statue of Zeus that stood within the temple's walls. The building also featured art depicting both versions of the Olympic festival's founding myth. The eastern pediment showed a scene from the legendary race between Pelops and Oinomaos. The temple's metopes, meanwhile, showed the 12 labors of Heracles, the other mythical founder of the games.
Μεγαλώνει με θεά.
Zeus was the god of sky and thunder, and king of the Olympians. He ruled the world from his home on Mount Olympus. The child of Cronus the Titan, Zeus overthrew his father and cast the Titans out in a great battle known as the Titanomachy. He had children of his own with his wife Hera, including Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe, and Eileithyia. He also had many children without Hera, much to her consternation, but there are too many to list here. Zeus was believed to have control over the lives of mortals, as his many epithets attest to. For example, his title Horkios made him a keeper of oaths, while Xenios was the name conferred to him as a protector of hospitality. In Greek art, Zeus was usually depicted holding a thunderbolt and sitting on a throne, befitting his position as king.
Επικαλούμεσαι. Μεγαλώνει με θεά. Αγλαόκημε. Τεχνών μήνυ πολύορμε.
The Temple of Zeus was home to the Chryselephantine statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The statue, made of gold, ivory, and wood, was sculpted by the renowned artist Phidias. At 13 meters tall, it was as impressive looking as it was difficult to maintain. Oil was used to protect the wood and ivory from cracking and to prevent general decay. While the statue does not exist today, it was thankfully described by Pausanias in great detail, so its legacy lives on.
Ελθέ, Μάκαρ, μύστης Ιβρίων και χαρημένος εείς. Επικαλούμεσαι, Μάκαρ,
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να συναντήσει με...
Hello again! I hope you enjoyed your visit and feel a little bit closer to the gods.
Well, as close as a mortal can get.
Is there anything else you'd like to do? Of course! Follow me, my friend!
Greetings, wanderer, and the Agora is the beating heart of any Greek city. It is a place where all types of people may gather, from citizens and foreigners to magistrates and philosophers. All manner of business is conducted here, including political meetings, legal proceedings, and trade. When you finish exploring, come find me, and we can talk more. See you soon, wanderer.
Και θυσία άλλης απολεσπίσου. Ευθεάτη πολλήν κοσμήματα στην αγορά.
The Agora was the civic center of Athens, but it wasn't only frequented by politicians and city officials. The area housed a market where people could purchase food and other goods from merchants. It was also frequented by philosophers, who used the public space to establish schools and pass on their teachings to students. Religion had its place as well. Temples dedicated to Hephaestus and Apollo were located in the Agora, along with the altar of the 12 gods and the monument of the eponymous heroes.
Αλλά ο τιστέμιδος ναός που και στη μανή.
The painted stoa, or stoa poikile, derived its name from the panel paintings on its wall. The paintings were created in the 5th century BCE by famous artists like Polygnotus and depicted Greek military victories like the Battle of Marathon. The stoa served as a public meeting place for citizens, but it was especially popular with philosophers who used the space to pass on their teachings. In 301 BCE, the philosopher Zeno of Kition chose the Stoa Poikile as the location for his school of philosophy, the appropriately dubbed Stoicism. Trade in the Agora was supervised by magistrates. There were 5 agoranomoi who kept order in the market, controlled the quality of goods, and collected market dues. This provided revenue to the city and helped pay the magistrates and those in charge of maintaining order. The market benefited everyone. Customers bought what they needed, merchants made their living, and city officials received the money they needed to keep the wheels of democracy turning. The original temple of Apollo Patrous was built around 535 BCE by Pisistratos, but was destroyed by the Persians during their invasion a few decades later. It long remained in ruins, except for the altar, which was left standing as a reminder of the Persian sacrilege. Eventually, a new temple was built in the 4th century BCE. Inside was a statue made by Euphranor, the same artist who painted in the Stoa of Zeus. The temple held special significance in Athens, as it was connected to the origin of the city's people. The name Patrous, meaning fatherly, referenced the belief that Apollo was the father of Aeon, founder of the Ionian Greeks, from whom all Athenians are descended.
Μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει με, φωνία και θυροκτώνε.
Ποιος χρεοδοτεί? Κληρονόμησας της μητρός στην ουσία και λέει τους κοινούς περιξένους. Ξέρεις, τι είστε όταν η μύτη της μύτης. Ο πρεσβύτερος χαλέθηκε και άπαντα αφήνεται. Ποιος χρεοδοτεί? Εγώ. Έστι τούτο το αγοροφρόνο. Τι είσαι αυτό?
Μεγαλώνει με θεά, αγλαώτη
Μεγαλώνει με και πολιώνει.
Επικαλούμε σε, Μάκαρ, πολιώνυμε, πυρήπολε και τελετάρχα, θεόν πάτερ δε και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε δημάτορ, ποτριόφθος όρχετος.
Είδα την ναός της δύναται διερευνήσει τα σαλπικίας και ευρύ.
Μεγαλώνει με θεά, αγλαώτη.
The Temple of Hephaistos overlooks the Agora from the Kolonos Agoreus Hill. Today, it is one of the best preserved temples in Greece, owing to its conversion to a church in the Middle Ages. But while this transformation preserved the structure, it also damaged the surrounding sculptures. The temple was dedicated not only to Hephaistos, the god of metallurgy, but also to Athena Ergane, goddess of arts and crafts. Nearly every part of the Hephaistion was lavishly decorated with depictions of famous mythological events, like the labors of Theseus. The Theseus scenes gave the temple the nickname Thesion, a name that lives on today as a city district in Athens. Boulaterion was another building in the Agora that contributed to the democratic process. It housed the Athenian Council of Citizens, the Boulé. This council of 500 was composed of 50 members from each Greek tribe, all of whom served a one-year term. They were chosen by lot from among citizens over 30. Every month, one group of 50 was chosen to lead the Boulé's executive committee, the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis met every day of the month and called meetings of the full council in the Boulaterion, where they spent their time discussing bills. The Prytaneon was one of the most important buildings in the Agora, as it was the headquarters of the Prytaneis. The Prytaneis was the executive committee of the Boulé, who ran the city's daily operations. The Prytaneis dined in the Prytaneon, and 17 of them slept on site to ensure there were always officials available to deal with emergencies. The Prytaneon also housed the official weights and measures of the city. The Fire of Hestia, which provided sacred fire for all public sacrifices, was also located there. The Heliaia was the most important court in Athens and was presided over by a group of judges called Heliasts. Judging was a regular part of an Athenian citizen's life, with trials happening almost every day. Heliasts were chosen randomly based on two factors. First, that they were on the official list of 6,000 potential Heliasts. Second, that they were present at court on the day of the trial. A stipend of 2 obols was established by Pericles to compensate for the loss of work while on Heliast duty, and also to encourage participation in the judiciary process.
Είναι υπάρεξ ότι ο Εχέφρον δεν απενεργεί επί φλαθμών και οδυρμών, αλλά επί των δεδομένων. Ο νους έστι ως περκύπελον, ο ευπίμπληση, αιτίεση ως περεπλευρέ του κυπέλου, έτεινες διδόαση ευμετάβολον σχήμα. Κλαθμοί και οδυρμοί προκαλούσαν δυσαρμονίαν μόνο.
Τι σχολή προποδών έχεις? Περί τι μήκους μημάτων συγκλέγεις?
In the Agora, an Athenian could buy and sell many different products. The permanent retail market was divided into sections according to the category of merchandise. Merchants and craftsmen who worked in the market could be citizens, foreigners, or even freed slaves. They sold everything from food and clothes to jewelry and slaves. With so much variety, competition was fierce, and that competition helped regulate the market's prices.
Μάγας, ολιστέ. Άπαντε στους αλιστούς εσύ τότε πια.
Το κρέας γίνεται φεφ κάκιον και πολλών κάκιον.
The Heliaio wasn't the only court in Athens. This other court was located next to the South Stoa. Historians believe it to be a court based on the discovery of a nearby box containing 7 bronze ballots. These ballots were used by jurors to give their verdicts. The reason trials were so common in Athens might have been related to their democratic regime, which promoted the individual's right to demand reparations for injustice. However, not all legal matters were settled in this fashion. If a claim was small enough, it was settled individually by a magistrate. Public trials were reserved for more serious offenses, such as murder, theft, and political crimes.
Είδα τι ναός της δύναται διερευνήσιν τας Αγρικίας.
Οι μίσεις των ηχθιοπολών ενοικιάστησαν κατά...
Το κρέας γίνεται φεφ κάκιον και πολλών κάκιον έτη. Έκαστος Κρεοπόλης λέγει το αυτό. Τι έστι το κάλες του πάλεφα και κρέας.
Οι αγρότες φοβούνται μη φέρουν λιχαρία εσμόνης κλέπτες. Το άρχον εστίδιους διοικησούσα εκεί, η βρεκείμενον το της μικρός της περιφέρεων, ο Μούταχτος.
Και βρει γαλαθινούς αμνούς και μόσκους ητευτούς. Αλλά όμως τιμήσετε πολλού.
Οι μίσεις των ηχθιοπολών κοπεί.
The mint was where the city made its coinage. It is believed that Athens' mint was in the city's agora, as modern excavations have turned up small disc-shaped pieces of metal used to make coins. Much of the silver required for minting coinage came from the Lavrion silver mines. Athens was so dependent on the mines that when they lost them during the Peloponnesian War, the city was forced to melt down a gold statue of Athena to mint gold coins and avert a monetary crisis.
Ίσως ο Χύρος παρεβίασε την χειροποίηση. Ίσως ανέπτυξε.
You have now experienced the Agora, following in the footsteps of countless Athenians before you. I hope the trip has impressed upon you how important this place was to trade, politics, and law. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. As you wish. Let's see what else Greece has in store for you.
Αναζητήσατε σύτων ηλαίων, πως γαρεξί και το κέπερι συνεφτάρια.
Πως και εκεί,
αθεωρών, αμέσως διαπυρήνει. Έχουμε ναυτοποιούς και καμίνους. Πρία στα σπογγίτας άρτους, ήτινες σε ανεπίκτηση.
Αναγνωρίσετε τους έλεγε ότι
Υπός χάριν της εισικτίδος, η ζήτω μου.
Here, visitor. And Welcome to this sacred site. This is Delphi, home of the renowned oracle. Greeks considered it the navel of the world. Pilgrims and kings journeyed here from all over Greece and beyond, seeking advice from Apollo through the voice of his interpreter, Pythia. During your visit, you will experience the sanctuary through a pilgrim's eye and discover how important oracles and prophecies were to the people of Greece. Now, go off and begin your pilgrimage. I will be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
On their journey to the Temple of Apollo, pilgrims walked this sacred path up Mount Parnassus. The summer sun beat down hot on their backs. Along the way, they took in the magnificent monuments, treasuries, and statues that adorned the road. These landmarks were tokens of people's reverence for the oracle's benevolence. All were dedicated to Apollo, and most were offered by cities to commemorate military victories. The monuments represented not only their donors' piety, but also their power and wealth. The sanctity of Delphi has endured to the present day, and visitors still take this very same route. One of the most impressive dedications to Apollo came from the Cnidians, a Greek population that colonized the island of Lipari, north of Sicily. The story behind this dedication is notable. The Cnidians were at war with the Etruscans in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Seeking a good omen, the Cnidians consulted the oracle, and following her advice, they successfully captured 20 enemy ships. To thank Apollo, they offered the god the same number of statues as ships seized.
Ουχή ο Κρόνος ψευδόμενος ή να εξαπατήσει τον πατέρα του.
Προείρικα το πατρί σου ότι πάζει να προφοριωτήσει.
Ίστα έχω ευκαιρία και είμαι καλύφωνος. Ο πατήρ μου έλεγε δίν με βίνα εις θέατρον. Ήρθε τον ευτυχικό λαρέγωμενα, ο αδέος χωροδικάς, ως μεσίωτε διδάξιν άπαντας. Ουχή, ήκουσα την βοηθήθεια τάφην και το πρώτερο. Μένεις η περιτικά του. Γιατί ουχή, αρούμε την προφητήσεις. Ή ακριβής τελείως. Πού καίστημη σπουδαίων. Εμός πατήρου δεν μία συναλλαγή είχε μετά το θεάτρο. Όσος πατήρης τα ανέσχυντος κλέπτης ύπων. Όποτε απεπειράσει πολύ σωμία.
Ποιος εμέ περιπέζει.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να
Πού πες γεννήσετε, τέλος να μου έρθετε.
Αλλά όμως μητέρος δύο αγαπά τον αληθινό.
Περί αγάπης, ου τόπος. Ο πλούτος αυτής δι προστατευτήνε.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο. Μάλλον υπηρετικός.
Μόνον όταν το επιχείρημα δομείται πιστικών, τότε δύναταν κερδάνε.
Να κλονίσει την ισορροπία του
Ανατρέχομαι εις
πνεύματος.
τους τραγικούς
Τα
της
γυναίκας
Γεστάφης
διαπέτυχε
Σένεκες,
πρωτάφτη,
μάλλον η
το αυτό και της
Σοφοκλέα.
δούλης. Χρώμεθα τους νέους με διδάσκεστε τα επιμηχανήματα αυτής ή να είστε στην άσυλη. Η τραγωδία διαφθείρει τους νέους και ούτε καταμαρθακίζονται.
Είναι ασταθή εν επιχείρημα,
Είναι
δύο οι
ασταθή
όροι.
εν επιχείρημα
Το
δύο οι
γιγνώσκην
όροι.
και το
Το
επίσταστε.
γιγνώσκην και το επίσταστε.
Άλλης τας
Αλλά
τραγωδίας,
εις τας τραγωδίας Σοφοκλής δείχνει
τρόπο
την
επιτυγχάνεται
τρόπο
Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας ένσης. Τραγωδία εκλαμβάνει τα ιστορίας αυτών και χρείται ταύτας τραγωδοποιού ένεκα. Ούτως ουκ αντιμιμείται τα σπουδαίας αξίας των ιστοριών τούτων. Τουν αντίον επιμηχανάται ταύτας και προσμυθοποιεί. Αποκρίτει την προαίρεση αυτού εν το ενδύματι της συγκατανεμωμένης ιστορίας, ως επιδείκνυση σατανικά ψευδολογήματα άνευ ηθικών αφηγήσεων. Είναι το τρόπος κατά προδίδωση του συμβολίτας αυτού.
Αλλά επί των δεδομένων.
Διαλέγομαι έναν τούτο άλλο, μάλλον υπηρετικός.
Ενθάδε εσμέν γουν.
Ναι, ενθάδε εσμέν.
Καταδικαστέα επιλέγει αξία το τραγωδοποιό. Τραγωδοποιός.
Next to the Naxian Sphinx stood a simple structure to display offerings from the Athenians, most of which were spoils of war. In particular, these offerings, called ex-votos, were prows of sunken Persian ships. The Athenians built the portico after their naval victory over the Persians in 478 BCE.
Ούτως, ούκ αντιμιμείται τα σπουδαίας αξίας των ιστοριών του. Τουν αντίον, επιμηχανάται ταύτες και προσμυθοποιεί. Αποκρύπτει την προαίρεση αυτού εν το ενδύμα της συγκατανεμωμένης ιστορίας. Ως επιδείκνυση σατανικά ψευδολογήματα άνευ.
Και ούτε καταμαρθακίζονται. Εκπλήσει.
Once arriving before the temple, pilgrims wishing to consult the oracle had to first pay a tax. This tax gave them the initial right to approach the altar of Apollo and make an animal sacrifice to the god. But before proceeding to the Pythia, the preliminary ritual had to succeed. If the animal reacted favorably and showed signs of acceptance to the god, it was sacrificed, and the pilgrim would be allowed to enter the temple to question the Pythia.
Καταδικαστέ ημίν ηθικιά. Τραγωδία ανέρεσης εστί. Εστιμιασμός μυτιόμενος.
At last, we arrive at the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle relayed her prophecies. The temple was the final destination of those seeking an audience with the Pythia, and its appearance matched the majesty of its purpose. Atop its imposing columns, the structure's pediments displayed famous mythological scenes, sculpted by the renowned Greek artist Antenor. But as grand as the temple looked from the outside, it paled in comparison with what happened within.
Προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας. Καταδικαστέ ημίν και ηθική αξία το τραγωδοποιό.
prophecies were given in the most restricted part of the temple, the Adyton, by a chaste woman known as the Pythia. Before delivering prophecies, she first purified herself with water, then burned laurel leaves and barley flour to begin the ritual. Finally, while seated on a tripod surrounded by offerings, the Pythia delivered Apollo's messages. Her words were often strange and indecipherable, and required further interpretation by the temple's priests. Despite much research, the exact causes of the oracle's behavior while prophesying are debated to this day.
Να σε πάβει τούτο. Μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει με. Χθονία και θυροκτώνε. Φυλαγρώτη και λυτηρία. Βρυμονίτης και βρωτών ελπίς. Ελθέ.
Myths say that while searching for an oracle who could impart their words to mortals, Apollo established a sanctuary on Mount Parnassus. Apollo took over this site by slaying its sinister guardian, the snake-like Python.
Κατέχεις ωραίων δρυμούς, ελθέ Θεά σώτηρα,
τούτο άδικον εστίν.
Απογέης ειρήνην τερατήν, καλυπλόκαμον θυγίαν, και ο Θεά εύδρομε, πέμπης της ωραίων κεφαλάς, νόσου στέκε άλγη. Μεγαλώνει με Θεά, αγλαώτη με, τεχνών μήτυρ πολύολβε, πολυλίστη λυτήρα κακών, εις τρούσα βρωτών ψυχάς, σύ Θεά, δώσ' ειρήνην πολύολβων και κόρον ειδηγίαν, επόλβησιν εν ώρες, γλαυκό, ευρεσίτεχνε, πολυλίστη βασίλεια.
Σύ Θεά, δώσ' ειρήνη πολύολβων.
Your visit is complete. I hope you now understand how important this sanctuary was, and how it affected the lives of people both in the Greek world and beyond its borders. To be honest, I could speak about Delphi all day. But what would you like to do now? Of course. Follow me.
Greetings, wanderer, and welcome to the port of Piraeus. Acting as a port for Athens, Piraeus welcomed merchants, goods, and travelers from all over the world. It was a central part of Athens' economy, but it was also fortified enough to protect the city's considerable fleet. When you finish exploring the port, find me, and we will talk further.
Piraeus, a peninsula southwest of Athens, became the city's main port after the politician Themistocles encouraged the development of its natural harbors. These developments led to the gradual abandonment of the older harbor of Phaleron. Piraeus's fortifications were further developed by Cimon and Pericles, along with the long walls which ensured goods could still be moved during sieges. Piraeus was divided into three main sectors: the military port, the Emporion, and the residential area. By the 5th century BCE, it had become not only Athens' naval headquarters, but also the mercantile center of the Mediterranean.
Και κριτικούς, ίστης είναι τη Δύση αμφιρεπής. Είδα την αδυνάμενα...
Piraeus' development during the 5th century BCE attracted many craftsmen, merchants. The population was a mix of Greek citizens, for the variety of the port's inhabitants. Most of the residents were involved in trade. Piraeus' commercial focus. One such rags to riches tale is that of Passion, a slave who eventually became a...
Ότι ούν Αγία, μοίρα, τεινά κοσμήματα εκλεκτά, είδα τεχνουργών ποιούντα βασκάνια, είδα την αδυνάμενον αν ευρύλση φλασκία είναι ωραία, μηδενός αδυνάμενον αν παρέχει
Κίνησε αυτόν.
Ώστε εις τα άπαντα στους φέροντας άπαντα. Λέξος ή την εμεί επιθυμία και ως
Έχομεν κατά μονοπόλιον λίγδους παρείας.
Ου δύναμε πιστεύει τούτο.
Στις πετροτόμης ή εξορίξαντομες φρικτής εκ των κατόγιων λατομείων. Έχομεν μάρμαρον πολύστικος τους ναούς και την αγορά. Έχομεν εξάδελφος
Piraeus was a demi, or district, of Attica. Because of its size, function, and varied population, it had a much more... Above all, within the port, there were two separate categories and retail trade. The Emporion was a commercial. All international transactions were elected magistrates managed all, but meanwhile, this was an common products. According to Hermippos, Athens was including figs from Rhodes. All taxes were collected on all.
Πάυσον τούτου.
Ποιος εμέ περιπέσει.
After arriving in the Emporium, this was where, and almost the Degma, they would occasionally give these privileges. Piraeus was a deme, and as such was supervised by a magistrate called the Demarchos. While most demarchoi were chosen locally within their deme, Piraeus was appointed directly by Athens, so the city could better monitor its commercial interests. In fact, matters regarding transactions, these were magistrates. They made sure merchants' measurements were always accurate, to prevent bad deals and scams. Even though Piraeus would eventually
Τι λαμβάνει η χώρα.
Τι έστι τούτο.
Τι συνέβη μόλις.
Έχουμε μάρμαρο πολύστικ των χείων. Βλεψί επιδιασφυζούσες ήων το σώμα. Δέσποινε και κύριοι πολίτε. Έχουμε χιτώνας περικαλύπτοντας το ημέτερον σώμα, ως περ τα αγάλματα, ή αοράτε εις τους λαούς και την αγορά. Δυνάμενον ανεκκρίση, μηδενός αδικούς, πολύ συντάγνα σύντομα ξωστασία.
Αμερικολία, τόσο έμπορες άπαντες πολλούς υπαρεμπορεύουν.
a commercial tax of 2%, or a pentecost, was placed on all. The tax was collected according to Andocides, however, while merchants were responsible for. Furthermore, overall, the sale of grain was overseen by special magistrates called Sitophilikeis. Since some Greek cities had a grain deficiency, and their duties encompassed this is no surprise, according to Demosthenes.
Ακούν ανάδικοι στην αποθήκη όταν τα ταβερνία τους.
Και άπαντες επισυγνίστε την ιδέα να
Δέσποινε και κύριοι πολίτε, έχομεν χιτώνας περικαλύπτοντας το ημέτερο.
Αχ, ηρίστο εμπαρόδο, τα των χρεών της χείρας. Πού κηδάνει όσοι υπάρχει, οπότε εις αυτήν δώσουμε το χρέος.
μη χρεολιτήσων μία διακάδα αγελάδων, άστινας ήλιθε παρεμβούν του ενού αδελφού. Αντιλαμβανόμεθα ότι ότε έφυγε μετά της Αγέλης, αγελάδε εξέφυγε συμπτώματα θέρμης και καθοδόν είναι σε σημειούν ότι αγελάς ουδενία, έτεινες ήσαν της λιμώνας, επέδειξε σημεία ασθενείας μέχρι τούτε. Αλλά όμως επανέλεξον, ποιήσεις τούτο. Αν προσλάβει την άδικο λάβων επαρχιακών, καταθλίψει ημάς λαφώντασαν. Και δε αντιλαμβανόμεθα ότι άλλε 12 είσαι άρτη η τεθνίκαση. Αγνοούμενοι τούτο εγένετο ασθενείας, ένεκα η άλλη στην ασθείας. Προσείπεται ημίν ότι τούτο το συμβεβικός απέλειπε το συζύγο ημίν 11 κεφαλάς αγελάδων και προτίθεται εξαργυρούν ταύτας μόνοι. Λυπούμεθα αλλού κομοδοξούμεν με θυμήν και αποστελούμεν ημίν το χρεοεισπράκτορα με επιστολής. Καλώς έχει. Διαγώνε. Τιδανή άφαλος. Κύριες χρέση. Ομοί ενήν και αή. Βεβαίως είναι ότι αν ταύτας πονεύσε τους συζύγους. Είναι μόνο χρεολιτώσει. Ωρα. Πλήσμονες κλεφτριδίονες. Εξή και το γεν περισσήνα του Θεού.
The Emporion operated overseas commerce was Emporoi transported cargo. Elsewhere in the Emporion, Emporoi and now Emporoi used the loans to pay for loans and it. However, in the event of a
και Βυζαντίου Χαλκιδόνος αισθητή. Πολλό τη δύναμη
You've returned. Birefs was if you have any questions. Of course. Follow me, wanderer.
Welcome, traveler, to the sanctuary. This is the sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary according he had met when you enter. Medical steles constitute they were slabs with the inscriptions. The steles outlined the patients. They were probably written by the sanctuary Asclepios.
Απίκασμα ο δεσπόζιεν το Αγίου του εμού εκεφάλου, ο θορυβή και επιφρονητά, το απίκασμα του έστι του χρόνου φάσμα. Τεταραγμένος στο στιγερό ατέγκο.
In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from this was no different in pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy after the preliminary of medical steles also mention Asclepios was originally born a mortal, and was Apollo killed Coronis after this. However, he rescued him. Apollo gave the baby to the over time. As this angered Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes, responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepios was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day.
Ίσως πατήρι στα ανέσχυτος κλέπτης κήπο. Όποτε από πειράτη πολύτουν μια κάμψη, λέγον είναι περσικό νυφάρι. Ποιούσι διαφόρος. Επίουν και σε άλλο. Σκυθικών εμπόρευμα. Πρωτίστως σκυθικών.
Μεγαλώνει με θεά.
Μεγαλώνει με και πολιώνει με. Στονία και φιλοκτώνε, φυλαγρώτη και λυτηρία.
Φαρπαγέντα άπαντα.
Επικαλούμε σε μάκαρ, πολιώνυμε, περίπολε και τελετάστα. Θεόν πάτερ δε και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε δημάτων, υποτριόσκος με οδηγές υπομών, έλφε, μάκαρ μίστες, γρίον και χαρημένος σε ήχους. Επικαλούμε σε μάκαρ, πολιώνυμε, θεόλε και τελετάστα. Θεόν πάτερ δε και ιέ, σκυπτούχε, κούρε δημάτων. Μοχλιόφος με οδηγέ των πομών, ελθέ, μάκαρ μίστες ιδρύων και χαρημένος σε ήχους λέγονται.
Των εκπληκτικών άνθρωπων, σπουδαίος χωροντας, ως της ίοντε διδάξιν άπαντας.
Μεχεί ήκουσα την ευήθιαν ταύτην και πρώτερο, μέληση την περί επιδαύρου.
Γιατί ουχή,
Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας ένεκεν. Τραγωδία εκλαμβάνει τις ιστορίες αυτών και χρείται ταύτας τραγωδοποιού ένακα.
The Epitateon was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the opera. They were often elected into the priesthood for 1 year. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams and during these functions, they were usually clad in white.
αγλαότιμη, τεχνών μήτυρ πολύονδε, πολυλίστη λυτήρα κακών, στρούσε βρετών ψυχάς, δώσ' ειρήνη πολύονδων, και κόρον η διγεία ανεπόλβησιν εν ώρες, γλαυκό, ευρεσίτεκη.
Αληθώς τούτο συνέβη. Ωρα πλήσμονες κλητρινότητες.
Μεγαλώνει και πολιώνει με. Φωνία και χειροκτώνε. Φυλακρώτη και λυτηρία.
Προέληκα το πατρί σου ότι έδι πάβει να αποστείλω της εδώ.
Επικαλούμε σε.
Τηράτε τούτο καθαρό. 10 μήνας από τις αυτής στέγης και ομός ατανούς δεπόποτε ακούεσαι την εμήν φωνή. Τηράτε τούτο καθαρό.
Της μητρός την ουσίαν και λέγεις μειός περξένου.
Τηράτε την τάξη. Ότε ειν εν στρατεία γύμναζον τους αρίστους, οδόγουν σέβας οίκιστον.
Ήλιωσε, διατάξω τους αλήτας δώσιν σοι εν ισχυρόν πλήγμα. Τιμωρήσω άπαντας, ουδεμίαν απειθία, ουδεμίαν.
Τι το τούτον!
Ορώ ημάς ως περ τους ελπούσιους, δίδομοι δε και της ιής εν κόλαφο. Νηνή δείξετε ημίν τας αρετάς ημών. Τηράτε την τάξην, ότε η στρατεία εξεγύμναζον τους αρίστους, απαιτώ γουν σέβας των πιστών. Περσέ, μία πίπνους αναμένουσα τον νέκη.
Τιμίο πρεσβύτερε, πέφτει κι άπαντα αυτήν εμείς.
Ισκρόδοτη, εγώ, έστι τούτο το δώρο να άφησε του τάφου.
Άφη προσέχει τάφα και μην τιμητέας.
Και ο ήλιος, τι έστιν η πίστη, ήμεν το σου το προσετή.
Ενθάδες μεν.
Άπατον θάλασσαν
Ενθάδες
αντλείς.
μεν.
Άπασες ημίξεις τάβονται τότε. Προσέχει και εντός του οίκου.
Κληρονομήσας της μητρός την ουσίαν και λέγεις μη ως περξέν. Ουσίως περσέ, μία πίπνους αναμένουσα τον νέκη.
Τιμίο πρεσβύτερος, πέφτει κι άπαντα αυτήν εμείς.
Ισκρόδοτη, εγώ, έστι τούτο το δώρο να άφησε του τάφου.
Άφη προσεχεί τάφα προς χάριν σου.
Τι έστιν η πίστης, ήμεν το σου το προσετή.
Κατανοώ ότι θέλεις να σας κρατήσει με οίκη.
Όπως γάμο της και επιστήμης.
Εκκληρονόμησε την οίκη παραδείγματος.
Ήσυχηστε τα έσονται του ανδρός της.
Θυμούμεν την ερήμη.
Άδικον εστί!
Ενθάδες μεν.
Ναι, ενθάδες μεν.
Άπασες
Τελείως.
ημίξεις πάβονται τότε. Προσέχει και εντός του οίκου.
Κληρονομήσατε.
Ήξεν. Ποιείς τα πανημήτηροι.
Τηράτε την τάξη, ότε είναι εν στρατεία εξεγύμναζον τους αρίστους. Απαιτώγουν σέβας οίκιστον.
Ανυπόφορον
Ήλιος
εστίν
ημί,
οράν.
ηλί ισή τιμιότερη ανά την υφήλιον. Αληθώς και εστέ ο άντρες, κράτιστη και κάλιστη όντινον εόρακα.
Ο έσονται του ανδρός της.
Θυμούμεν την ερήτραν.
Σύ ου βασανιώσε, διατάξε τους αλήτας δώσιν σοι εν ισχυρόν πλήγμα. Τιμωρήσω άπαντας, ουδεμίαν απειθία, ουδεμίαν.
Διαλέγομεν αν τούτο άλοθη, μάλλον ιδιωτικός.
Ως γέληθάτε ορών σε.
Αληθές
Ορώ ημάς ως περ τους εμούς ιούς, δίδομοι δε και της ιής εν κόλαφων. Νηνή δείξετε ημίν τας αρετάς ημών.
Οίκουεσαν ότι φυγάτε. Εκκληρονόμησε την οίκιαν και δούλος παραθείων.
Δέστε τους πόδας σας, άπαντες πόδες όπισθεν του ορίου, διαταγή. Γυράτε τούτο καθαρό, 10 μήνας υπό της αυτής στέγης και ομόσατε, αν ουδεπόποτε ακούεστε την εμήν φωνή. Τηράτε τούτο καθαρό.
Ναι, ενθάδες μεν.
Άπασε εις ημίξεις πάβονται. Προσέχει και εντός του οίκου.
Κληρονομήσας της μητρός την ουσίαν και λέγεις μη ως περξέν.
Τι λαμβάνει η χώρα.
Ήλιος ημί, ηλί ισή τιμιότερη ανά την υφήλιον. Αληθώς και εστέ ο άντρες, κράτιστη και κάλιστη όντινον εόρακα.
Και ο ήλιος
Δυσπετώ το βίο. Λέγω εμ' αυτό. Φωνία και φυρεκτό.
Επικαλούμεσαι, Μάκαν, πολιώνυμε.
Δρυμολίθες και
Ρίστο εν παρόδοτα των χρεών της χίλιας.
Γυρίστο
Ούκ
εν
είδα
Παρόλο
παρόδοτα.
του πατρίς σου, ότι έδι πάβει να προστιμάσεις.
Η πάλα ταύτη δύναμη.
Αμέ, τούτους τους όνους μαστιγού, ακαταβαύστος μαστιγού.
The Abaton was built in the northern boundary. The Abaton was details of the. They were also known.
Είτε εν μουσική, εν ρυθμότινη, άδετε και εργάζεστε.
Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the Abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, as they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculous. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the Abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be...
I see you've completed... As you can see, now. Very well. Follow me.
Greetings, wanderer. One that won't... For an outgoing people like the Greeks, they inside. They look for me when you are done.
The house, or oikos, was a residence for Greek families and their slaves. Contrary to modern houses, the courtyard was the house's central fixture. It was the building itself was made up of familiar women, a term that inspired.